is 9 p.m. on the East Coast, and this is PJNet Live. We have a bumper rolling. We are recording. We are streaming. Our guest is waiting in the green room, and our chat room is waiting. So, counting down, Studio 8 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well, good evening. Welcome to PJNet.tv. I am your host, Coach Prasick, and if you are watching this on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or wherever, we're so glad you've joined us. We hope you'll stay with us for the entire session this evening. We also hope you'll join the live fellowship in our chat room, tpjnet.tv. We always have a good time, and I always love it when we have a first-time guest appearing, which is the case tonight. Now, you heard a little bit, you may have even heard the name or mentioned last night, because all of the buzz going around the new book, Love Knots. Love Knots is written by 13 different authors, one of which is Ed Chappelle. And Ed joins us from his home. And fair warning, his dog Hershey is a wonderful 5-year-old chocolate lab. I haven't seen him yet, but we could, right, Ed?
There's a possibility. He's laying down right now, so we'll see what happens.
Well, he's 5 years old. He'll probably, stay pretty calm. But, folks, I had a chance to talk with Ed earlier during the day, and he sent me an email with some bullet points in his testimony. We could write a book on your testimony, Ed. Where would you like to start?
Well, let's start at the beginning when I arrived at this wonderful planet. I was born on May 20th of 1961, and I was born in Alexandria, Virginia. That's right outside Washington, D.C. And my family and I lived there till 1968, where we moved to Fairfax County, which is literally just right up the road from Alexandria. And that's where I grew up at. It was a good place to live. I started school there, and they had diagnosed me with a speech impairment. Now, for somebody who is 6 or 7 years old, that was something you didn't want to be labeled with. And it just instantly turned me into this shy kid. I mean, I wouldn't have anything to do with any kind of big group or anything like that. I was okay with one-on-one or one-on-two, but anything after that, it made me nervous, and I just closed in. It got so bad that when I got in high school, that when it came time to take book reports and put them up in class and stand up and talk about your book, that I would I pleaded with the teacher, please just fail me. I don't want to get up in front of this class. I just don't want to do it. It scares me to death, and I don't have much confidence in myself. But most of the time, I had to go and do it anyway, and it was a complete disaster for me, which just made things even worse for me in school. Mm-hmm. I just didn't have no confidence in myself at all when it came to large groups being anybody over 3 or more. Mm-hmm. And that's basically my growing up as my childhood. Fortunately, later on in my life, God said, "You know what? I'm going to change that in you. I'm going to do something about that, because I got some plans for you, and I got some talents and I got some gifts, and you're going to have to get over that being shy thing, because I've got people for you to talk to. I got people for you to plant the word into their hearts. I got people for you to be there to harvest what somebody else has planted. So you're just going to have to get over that." So this is how I got over it. In 1977, I and my friend Tony had just gotten back from throwing the baseball. And we got out of my car. My dad stuck his head out of the house and he said, "I need to talk to you." And he had this serious look on his face. And I thought, uh-oh, what did I do? And Tony started leaving. And he said, "No, Tony, I want to talk to you too." So we got in the house, we sat on the couch, and we looked at each other thinking, man, what does my dad have on us? What did we do? And he looked at me, he said, "I got some really bad news for you." He said, "Your cousin Jay has passed away." And I sort of looked at him like, what? Because Jay was 16 years old. He was the same age as I was. And I think the shock of the whole situation sort of took over on me. And reality didn't really hit until the night of that viewing, and I saw my cousin, 16 years old, laying in that casket. And my whole process of life changed. I thought to myself, you know what? Before all this happened, I thought being 16, I was going to live forever. Mm-hmm. And now I realize that life was just not guaranteed for anybody. That, you know, you could be alive one minute and dead the next. So you have to do something with your life. You have to make it count for what you had. So after all that had happened, a few weeks later, my parents invited this youth minister from my aunt and uncle's church and my cousins went to. It was a Reality Gospel Church up in Alexandria, Virginia, and the pastor's name, youth pastor, was Richard Davis. And they told me he was coming over to talk to me. And I thought, well, that's fine. You know, I'll talk to a minister. You know, I'll try not to fall asleep, but I'll talk to this guy. And he came over, and he was absolutely the craziest youth minister period that I ever met. I mean, that was in a good way. He had such a way to relate to kids, to reach in and bring out what God had put into you way before. And he was able to relate the gospel in such a way that even as kids, it would catch your attention because you wanted to hear every word of it. And it got me so curious about this guy that Tony and I started attending the church. And it was in the fall of 1977. We were having a youth meeting every Friday night, and Pastor Davis had delivered his message, and he was in the altar call. And the power of God that night was just awesome. I mean, you could just slice the air. It was so thick. And I was sitting there. Remember, I'm a shy kid, right? I don't get in front of nobody. 3 or more people, that's it. And I was holding on to the seat in front of me with a death grip because I did not want to get up.
Your fingerprints are still in the back.
That's right. I am not getting up in front of all these people. And I held on as tight as I could. And finally, God won. And I got up and I went down there and I asked Jesus into my heart and accepted him as our Lord and Savior. And that was the best decision I've ever made in my life. Because that literally changed me around. I went from being shy to being somewhat outspoken. God wasn't finished with me, but he did shine the light saying, you know what, there's another side of you don't realize you have. And I'm about to show you what you can do with me. So we started going to church, and my sister wanted to move, and Tony and I decided we were going to help her one day. And we loaded up the boxes from her previous apartment. We were going to take them to the apartment she was moving into. And this was a 1965 Pontiac Le Mans that I was driving. Those cars were made back then. Mm-hmm. There was no cheap plastic. These cars are made out of metal. And I was sitting in a 4-lane road, traffic coming this way and that way. There was no middle lane for a left-hand turn. So I was sitting there with my blinker on, waiting for traffic to clear so I could turn into a complex. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, Tony's on the right in the passenger seat, and all of a sudden I hear this voice saying, put your foot on your brake as hard as you can. And the minute I did that, this guy that was in the right hand lane had passed this guy and didn't see me stopped in the left hand lane. And he tried to get back over, but he didn't. And he sideswiped the Pontiac and he drove my Jack through the side of it. He hit me that hard. And Tony and I walked out of that with scratches and bruises that night. But if it hadn't have been for that voice, I'm sure we might not even walked out that night. We would have been pushed into that traffic for sure. So God already had my attention. I was starting to hear him talk to me. Another episode, we had joined the Live Singers, which was part of the youth group. 20, 30 kids. We would go to different churches and sing gospel songs and act them out.
Interpretive movement, we call it as Southern Baptist.
There you go.
Yeah, we don't call it dancing. Dancing's the sin.
Yeah. Did I say dancing?
No, it's interpretive movement. Yeah.
You're right, brother. You're right. Shame on me. But anyway, we never went to churches, but I mean 40, 50, 60 people at the most. Mm-hmm. And somehow another Kings Dominion, which is at a theme park up near Richmond, had heard about us, and they invited us to Christian music night or music day that day, and they wanted us to sing. When we were told about that, I mean, we're kids 13 to 18. We were nervous as all. And singing in front of all those people, that was just beyond our wildest imaginations. And that Saturday night, a week Saturday night before we would go, I lay down and I had a vision. And in the vision, we had lined up by the stage. And I looked up and I saw this rainbow in a circle. And it was above the stage, looking down at us. And as we went up on the stage, it stayed. And when we came back down, the rainbow disappeared. So, I'm like, wow. So I went the next Sunday morning and told everybody at Sunday school about it. And I said, I'm thinking God's telling us don't worry about this, that he's got this. So to my wildest imagination, I never thought this would happen. But we got there the next Saturday, and we were lined up by the stage in my vision. And we get ready to go on, and somebody says, look up, you ain't going to believe this. And there was a rainbow in a circle above that stage in the sky. And it stayed there the whole time while we sung. And when we got off, that rainbow disappeared. Now I got God talking to me. Now I got God showing me visions. And I thought, my goodness, where's he taking me? And I finished up high school and graduated in June of 1980 and felt the calling of the call on my life from God. So I started attending Faith School of Theology up in Bangor, Maine. Now, this was a very inexpensive school, and it wasn't because of the education value, because they taught strictly from the Bible, word by word. But tuition was very cheap. So my parents and I thought about it, and they say, I think you ought to go here, Ed. So off to Bangor, Maine I went. And I got up there, and it didn't take me too long to realize why this place was cheaper. They basically lived off the land. They grew in their own garden, had their own hogs, had their own chicken house. They went out in the woods and cut down lumber for firewood. So here's a city boy stuck out in the middle of the country. And I tried the lumberjacking thing with cutting down and hauling the wood up in the trucks, but that didn't go too well for me. So they moved me over to the chicken coop. And if Diane, you're listening, you're going to laugh at this, because there's three things I remember about the chicken coop. First thing I remember is that chicken stink. And to this day, I can still smell that chicken coop. The second thing I remember about chickens is that chickens fight, and when they fight, they they end up killing each other, and there's nobody to pick up those dead chickens except for you. And the third thing I remember about the chickens was some chickens were um, okay with you getting their eggs, and other chickens weren't so crazy about you reaching up and getting their eggs out of the nest. So the chicken thing didn't work out for me either. So I thought, you know what? I've tried this place. I can't deal with this place. I grew up in the city, and I can't deal with the country thing. So I had made up my mind that I was going to pack my bags and leave. And the Sunday night before I was going to leave that week, we had a Sunday night service, and somebody came up to me and they said, I got a word from God for you. And I said, okay. They said, now nobody knew I was leaving. He said, God told me to tell you to stay and don't give up. He's got something for you to do. And this would be a great story if I could tell you, you know what? I unpacked my bags and I stayed. But I didn't. That week I packed my bags, pointed my car back towards Virginia, and I went back home. It was okay getting back home, but when I got back home, all the guilt, all the shame just came crushing down in my spirit, and I felt so bad that I had let God down. And I thought for sure that God had nothing to do with me now. And I get to see him washing his hands, saying, you know what? I told you to stay and you didn't. So that's it. I'm finished with you. That's how much that guilt was eating at me. And I tried everything. I tried different jobs to try to get me away from that calling, and nothing ever worked out for me. So on '81 in September, August, I joined the Air Force and got in the military, thinking that might help me.
Yeah, they'll move you.
And yeah, it motivated me. 6 weeks of basic training, went to Ellsworth Air Force Base in Rapid City, South Dakota. South Dakota is a very interesting state. That's what I'll say about South Dakota. While I was there, God was there with me. He was chasing me. And he kept knocking on my door, my heart's door, and I kept feeling his presence. There's a few times in South Dakota I went to the chapel and prayed, but I was still on the run. I still wasn't willing to forgive myself for what I'd done. So in '83, they sent me to Okinawa, Japan, and I thought, man, this is great. You know, God has been chasing me all around South Dakota, but I know there's no way God's going to be in Okinawa. I mean, that's halfway around the world. I can finally get away from him and get away from this calling. And I get to Okinawa. 2 days later, I'm up in the barracks in the second floor. I'm packing my stuff, and I heard this knock out in the hallway, and I went out there, and the door that leads into the barracks somehow got locked. And this door was not supposed to be locked, but somehow it got locked, and there was two guys on the outside wanting to get in. So I walked down there to open up the door, and as soon as I opened up the door, those two guys looked at me and they said, "Do you know Jesus?" And I just shook my head and I sort of looked up. I'm like, really? My goodness, God has followed me to Okinawa. And I thought about it for a while, and then I realized, you know what? God didn't follow me to Okinawa. God was already here waiting for me. And he kept dealing with me there too, but I was still stubborn. I still couldn't forgive myself for what I had done. And I stayed on the run. I mean, there was a few times I was in the chapel in Okinawa too on my hands and knees. But I just continued to run from that call. I got out, and in the '93, my dad passed away, which was really hard on me at the time. And then in 2001, my mom passed away. And that was even harder. And I think because you have two parents. If you lose one, then you're going to depend on the other one more. And mom was my anchor at the time after dad passed away. She was there for me to help me to make sure that if we didn't have something to eat, that she would cook. She cooked on Sundays for us. And then she passed away. And I remember the first time in my life, I was so mad at God. I was outside that night she passed away, and I was looking up at the stars, and I shook my fist. And I said, why? Can you give me a good reason why you took my mom? I said, God, you knew she was my anchor. Why did you do that? And I felt this voice inside my spirit, and he said, son, first of all, your mom was not your anchor. You know I'm your anchor, son. And second of all, I'll help you get through these storms. Just depend on me, and I'll help you get through all this. I had started back to school in 2000, going to Vintage Bible College up in Winston-Salem, trying to get a degree in Associate Biblical Studies, trying to make up for what I did in the past. And it almost took me 10 years, but you know what? I finally got that degree. And the reason it took me 10 years is because I was taking 2 classes a semester and working 40 hours a week, along with taking care of kids. And I got towards the end of the 9 years or so, and I started adding up classes and realized I had 2 semesters left, and I had 5 classes. And 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 5. So I had to make a tough decision and add another class to one of my semesters. So I decided to do it in winter, so I wouldn't have the summertime or the springtime pressure. And I started taking 3 classes, and about halfway through that semester, I was so far behind in classes. I mean, it was terrible. I could not get caught up for anything. So I decided, you know what, I got to go to the library. I got to have at least 8 hours, and maybe I can get halfway caught up. So I went to the library and went up to the 3rd floor, because that was the most quiet place in the library. And when I looked to the left, I had tables, and I looked to the right, I had tables. I made the decision to go to the right, and there was 5 empty tables, nobody, nowhere near. I sat down, and as I unloaded my books, I noticed this piece of paper, probably about that big, sitting facing me. And I thought, okay, I got to look at this. I'm curious. And I looked at the piece of paper, and I couldn't figure out what it said at first, but I finally figured out it had a scripture on it. It was 1 Corinthians 15:58. And I want to remind you before I tell you what this scripture says, that I was burned out. I was to the point where I was going to put the books back in the bag and just forget about it. I couldn't finish school. It was just too much for me. And I opened up the Bible, because the scripture was not written out on a piece of paper. And I opened up the Bible, and this is what it said. It said, therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. And as soon as I read that, I went from instant burnout to instant, let's go. Let's go take on these classes. Let's get these things finished, and let me get my degree, and let me continue what God's got me to do. I went for weeks telling people that God left me a letter in the library. And they looked at me like I was crazy as I could be. And I told them, I said, well, explain, how did this happen? I just left that completely charged up and just ready to go. And that's just a brief summary of what God has done for me. I've had the opportunity to do street ministry, knocking on doors. I've been allowed to hold an associate pastor several times, which means speaking in front of people. I've had the opportunity of being in gospel singing groups and also performing solely, doing solos for songs. The last thing that has happened lately is God's gifted me to do devotional writings, which Sister Diane encouraged me with. And I'm writing for VineWords.net, and I've also, as of Friday, am now a published author, which is pretty amazing in itself. Because if my English teacher, if he's still alive and he finds this book, he's not going to believe. He's going to wonder how in the world I did this. And I thought about that, and this is what I wrote. I said, God will always make a way when there seems to be no way, when you walk God's way. And I truly believe that. You know, God has brought me through so much, and it's just amazing. I call them God moments, when there's absolutely no way I can explain it. I call those God moments where he's come down and personally given me encouragement through somebody else, through a note, through the scriptures. I mean, we serve an awesome God, and I would encourage anybody who doesn't know him to first get to know him. You know, to open up your hearts and your minds to him, in your heart. And for those who do, I would encourage to continue the good work that God's placed for you to do, and to keep on keeping on, because one day we'll finish this, and one day the rewards are going to be so much more than what we've ever gone through on this earth. So just encourage everyone to keep on keeping on.
Ed, an amazing story of a modern day Nineveh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Ed, thanks. That is a powerful story, and we will think about that as we look at the new work, Love Nots, which you helped contribute. Right. We appreciate you sharing your story, Ed. It's very powerful.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity of sharing it.
Right.
Giving God the honor and glory for everything he's done for me.
Appreciate it, Ed. All right, folks, pjnet.tv. We are live and we are on the air and we are late. But Del Didway is eager to join us as soon as we get things worked out here. Folks, that'll be in just a few minutes, so stay where you're at. As I leave, I ask two questions. First, what is the boldest thing that you have ever done for Jesus Christ? And secondly, when was that? Folks, I hope that none of us will ever be satisfied with either answer.